Hi, everybody. This is Parenting Against the Grain. I hope this is working. Facebook has changed their interface lately and it looks a lot different. Uh, okay, it looks like it's working. All right. Hello, everybody. This is Parenting Against the Grain. This is a group about parenting with using research and intuition and not just sort of going with the cultural flow of what popular parenting strategy is hot at the time. So, if you are new to this group, welcome. I try to go live once a week, but lately that has not been happening. If you've noticed, like all of you, probably my kids are at home all the time now due to both summer and pandemic. So, finding time to get online and not be interrupted is a challenge. Most of you can probably relate to that. My name's Amy Webb. I'm the host of this group. Hopefully, some of you guys will be on live. I think there's a few people on, and this is all changed. So if you comment and I don't see it, I apologize. Let me pull it up in my phone. Maybe I can see what's going on. Everything looks different than the last time I did this, so I hopefully I won't miss any comments. Um, if you're on live, maybe you can say hi or something so I know if I can see comments. Maybe I can. Okay. I put a little poll in the group the other day, a couple days ago, and temperament came up as one of the topics people were interested in. And I do really want this to be interactive. And if you're watching this later, you can comment and I will hop in and check comments later. Um, and if you're watching live and you have a question, just pop it in there. Okay, so we are going to talk about temperament. And hopefully this will be, oh, good. Hello, Susan. Thank you for doing that so I can know that I can actually see comments. That's helpful. Um, yeah, so temperament, I thought if you've been in this group for a while, you know this is something I talk about quite a bit, but mostly because I think it's a topic that is not often discussed in parenting circles very often. And I think it's something that is really important in some way that we can really use research in our daily lives. And that is one thing this group is all about is trying to take what we know from parenting research and child development research and actually be able to use it in our everyday life with our kids. So temperament is sort of a construct that, we hear it thrown about, maybe not the word temperament, but we hear parents talk about, oh, my child is very strong willed, or my child is shy, or slow to warm up. Those are all things related to temperament, right? And so there's tons of research about temperament, but it's not often filtered out into the modern world of parenting. It's just kind of stuck in these academic journals. So I wanted to go over just a little bit of the research. This is just a brief overview, just to give kind of a taste of what we know, and then talk a little bit about why this can influence our parenting with our individual children. So first off, temperament is this construct that researchers came up with many years ago to kind of describe how different children approach situations differently. And if you have, even if you just have, if you have one child or more than one child, if you've been around more than one child in your life, you have seen how temperament plays out. So you get to a situation, maybe a party, or even just going to the playground, and some kids just attack that playground like it's the best thing in the world and they just want to get on it right away. Another child might be more cautious and approach a playground, especially if it's a new situation, new playground, with more caution and take their time and figure out, what's different about this situation. And temperament is, you can see it from a very young age. As soon as your baby is at home with you and you start to figure out how this baby interacts with the world, you will start to see things about temperament. Some babies are very reactive to their environment, some can sleep through anything. Some babies have intense reactions to feeling discomfort, hunger, or needing a diaper change or something, and they just scream, and others just kind of, cry, but not so dramatically. And this goes for all types of different situations. So, researchers kind of set out this whole range of characteristics that describe temperament. Things like activity level, approach withdrawal. So that's like how a child approaches a new situation. Did they really just jump in, or are they kind of more withdrawn at first? Mood, do they tend to be happy or unhappy as sort of their baseline, mood? Rhythmicity, which relates to their natural biological rhythms. Do they fall into some sort of pattern sort of easily, or does it take a lot of effort to get them into some sort of pattern of sleeping, eating, that type of thing? Persistence, that one's pretty obvious. Attention span, that's can be a part of temperament. Adaptability, this is a big one, right? Is a child more adaptable to changes in their routine, or they struggle with changes? That's adaptability. Threshold, that means how sensitive they are to external stimulation, noise, textures, different foods, sounds, things like that. Intensity, the level of their emotional reaction to things. This is something we see, so I see this all the time with kids, where some kids will fall down and scrape their knee and they'll just kind of barely whimper, brush it off, move on. Other kids, it's like the world is coming to an end and they scream and cry. Okay, and so I think, well, I'm going to get into this later, but so that's intensity. And then distractibility. So can they stay on a task and not be distracted? Are they very intense about their attention to something, or are they easily distracted? That can be part of temperament. So researchers went through all these different elements of temperament, and the classic study that now was done, I think it was probably more than 50 years ago, um, they determined that 65% of the children they studied could be classified into kind of a label. Those labels are easy, which was about 10% of the population. Uh, Well, that may not be 10. That doesn't seem right. 10%. Anyway, difficult was 10%, difficult temperament. And then slow to warm up was about 15%. So there's still a big chunk of the population that they were not able to really classify. So I think later on, when research kind of developed more, what they started to see was, okay, maybe this isn't just these labels, these three classifications. Maybe it's more of a continuum, right? Like you're kind of a little bit more difficult or a little bit easier, or it's not just this flat label, right? And so now I think we tend to think of temperament in more of that continuum type terms. And I did not come up with those labels, by the way. I know people sometimes kind of cringe when they hear a child labeled difficult or easy, because really it's a range, right? It's not just one child is difficult, one child is easy. But that was sort of the classic labels that they developed. These researchers named Thomas and Chess, and so that kind of stuck for a while, but now we're starting to see it's more of a continuum, right? You have a child who's a little bit more on the high intensity side, which would be, in the past maybe considered difficult, and then you have children who are more on the easy, kind of easygoing side of the temperament range. So that's what they developed, and I think it's still a pretty useful concept to think about when you're looking at your children and these different characteristics. How do they respond to situations? I think it's useful still, even in today's world. And so I hope that makes sense to everybody. If anybody has questions, comment. If people are on live, and I only see one person I think on live, but I hope that makes sense, that there's this sort of range of temperament, and it affects not just whether they're shy or extroverted, or whether they're out, that's the kind of the one that we commonly hear, someone's an extrovert or an introvert. That's a piece of it, but there's all these other things about persistence and kind of biological rhythms and all that that can come into play, as well as just the introvert extrovert part of it. So the other point I wanted to talk about was, why does this help us as parents, or why can it help us understanding our child's temperament? I think it's pretty obvious in most situations, but let's just think about this for a minute. One thing is recognizing possibly differences between your own temperament and your child. So that's one part of it, right? If your child has a different temperament than you, that can cause some challenges, but it can also be a point of just understanding. So, and the same can go for if you have the same temperament. If you recognize early that your child has this, very similar temperament. Oh, thanks, Susan. Um, a similar temperament as you do, then you can help them through the world because you've been there and you know what it's like to have that temperament or similar temperament as you go throughout the world. Um, just as an example, my situation, I have found that my boys, especially one, they both have very different temperaments than me. I tend to be more introverted, quiet, approach the world with caution. They attack the world like it's, there to be taken and it's theirs. Very extroverted, especially one of them. So, understanding that at an early age, that really can help diffuse a lot of situations. So, just as an example, I wrote an article about this, and the example I used was I took my son to a baseball camp a couple years ago during the summer. He was out there for 3 hours, running, hitting all the baseball stuff for 3 hours in the heat. So when I pick him up, I'm thinking he's, from my perspective, if that was me, I'm going to need a break. If that was me, I would be like, let's go get a drink and relax and, do something kind of calming. He gets in the car and he's like, can I have a play date and can I go swimming and can I do this? He was not done. He wanted more social interaction. He wanted to be with friends. He loved it. It gave him energy. Okay, so if I had not understood that was his temperament, I would have looked at him like he was crazy and just thought, okay, we're going home to take a nap. I don't know what's wrong with you. We're going to go rest. But I understood this is not just him trying to be difficult or whatever. He really loves that social interaction and it gives him energy and it feeds him. And so we had to kind of work through this and figure out a way to meet his needs, but also, he will push himself to the point of exhaustion. And so I have to also step in and set some boundaries that, okay, you have to rest a little bit before we go on and do the next thing. So that's just an example to show, understanding your child's temperament, that the things that they are showing that they need, they are real needs. It's not just like them trying to be difficult or being spoiled or whatever words you want to use. That these temperamental tendencies are real psychological needs. The need to, if you're an extrovert, that need to be with people is a real need. And if you're an introvert, that need to be quiet and to be to yourself and alone is a real need. And you will start to kind of break down and not do so well if that need isn't met. And I think all of us can relate to that from our own perspective. If you're an introvert or an extrovert and like extroverts during this time of pandemic and quarantine when we've been at home, I know extroverts have been struggling with that because that is a real need for them to be socially engaged with people. Whereas introverts, we need some social interaction, but we can deal with being by ourselves for a long time. It doesn't bother us as much. So if your child is struggling, especially during this time of, if you've been at home a lot and you haven't been able to see friends a lot, think about that temperamental aspect and that could be part of what is driving their behavior. It's not just them trying to be difficult or being unreasonable, that is a real need, whatever that need is for, based on their temperament. So that I think helps a lot in terms of understanding where your child's behavior is coming from. That, you know, and with when we talk about positive parenting, we always talk about look at the underlying need. Some of you have probably seen that iceberg model where like the kids' behavior is up here on top of the iceberg, and they're yelling or they're whining or they're doing something we don't like, right? But underlying that is always some sort of need that is usually there. Sometimes it's just a skill that they don't have yet, but from a temperament perspective, it could be a real psychological need that they're trying to express, but they just can't express it in a very good way yet. So understanding that is a really good piece of the positive parenting because you can try to meet that need instead of just deal with the whining or the tantrum. Try to uncover what that real need is, and that can be a really helpful approach. And it kind of diffuses a lot of tension sometimes, that we're not just punishing their their tantrum or their behavior, that we're trying to really get to this underlying need that they might have. So temperament can inform that. Um, the other way understanding temperament can help us is when our children are in different situations in life, right? Especially school situations. So if you understand a little bit about your child's temperament when they start school for the first time, or they move to a new school, or just school in general, if they're having challenges and you feel like something about here is not a good fit about this school, looking at it from a temperamental perspective can really help because, some schools, there's just the whole range, right? Some schools, at least in the US, are very, you kind of sit at your desk most of the day and you're expected to just kind of be quiet and do your work. Well, if your child's an extrovert or very active, has a high activity level, that's going to be a challenge for them, right? If they can't really get up much and move around and talk with their friends or do group projects, that's going to be a challenge. They can go the other way too. We attend a school that has a lot of project based learning, and the kids get to move around a lot and work in groups and change what groups they're working on throughout the day. That's great for some kids. If you're an introvert and you approach the world with a little bit of caution and you don't like interacting with a lot of new people, that could be a challenge. So, looking at the school situation or whatever daycare situation, preschool situation, whatever, things your child does outside of the home, that can come into play as well, because it's not to say that that school is a bad school or this situation, this camp or this sport or whatever it is a bad thing. It's just saying it might not be the right fit for my child based on their temperament and how they approach the world. So that's something to consider as well when you are looking at activities, that your child might be interested in. Think about whether that really fits their temperament or not. Um, okay, so that's kind of how temperament can help us with parenting. The last thing I wanted to talk about briefly was sort of making peace with your child's temperament. And so this, for some people is not a challenge. You just love your child the way they are, and that's awesome. For other people, sometimes figuring out, my child has these quirks or these unusual temperamental aspects that sometimes can make interacting with them difficult. I mean, let's be honest, not everything is like rainbows and sunshine, right? Sometimes these certain tendencies can make it hard to interact with them if they have a very high intensity level, and they kind of lose their emotional cool at the drop of a hat. That can be hard to interact with, especially when you go out in public and you're worried they're gonna melt down. Or and so first of all, just understanding that's who they are can help a lot, because you can avoid certain situations that might set them off or might cause some challenge in terms of like public interaction with people. um, and just going to parties and things like that. I mean, if you have a child who is very introverted and doesn't approach new people well and has a hard time warming up, going to a big party is going to be a challenge, and you can prepare yourself and help prepare your child if this is something that you really need to do. um, Come up with some strategies to help them cope with that situation. And the same with if you have a child who's very active and you're going to some sort of situation, a party or dinner party or a gathering where they're going to have to be sitting still a lot and kind of confined, that's going to be a challenge. So you can come up with ways to help work around that situation, right? So it doesn't become a total disaster. And it can be hard. Um, I know when my kids were little, especially toddler age, we would often avoid situations that involved a lot of sitting and having to be still because I knew they just couldn't do it. Library story time, for example, it's the thing when your kids are very young, toddler, preschool age, to go to story time at the library, and you think you're being such a good parent because you're encouraging literacy. And I so wanted to be that parent, but my kids would not sit through library story time for anything when they were under 4, 5. They would just go off and roam and not listen to the story. And I'm like, why are we here? But we would go to the library and do other things, right? You can work around this. But you just have to understand that not everything is going to be a fit for your child based on their temperament. And it doesn't make you a bad parent. It doesn't make your kid a bad kid. It's just who they are. So coming to peace with that your child's temperament is maybe different than you thought it would be, or it, poses some challenges. The best quote, and this was not about temperament, but the best quote I've heard about this recently was from Gretchen Rubin, who does the Happier podcast. I don't know if any of you guys listen to that. She has these little quotes that she throws out sometimes, and I thought this related to temperament so well. The quote is, "It's not a bug, it's a feature." So this apparently is a quote that software developers use when they develop, a new program, and it has some bug in it, some aspect to it that it was not planned into the software program. And they have come around over the years, and it instead of saying it's a bug, they say it's a feature. And so that puts a positive spin on this thing that they didn't intend for it to be in their software program, right? And so I think if we look at that for ourselves and for our kids, and she pointed this out in the podcast, this could be a really helpful way of looking at different things. My child's temperament is not a bug, it's a feature. This is who they are. This is potentially their superpower, right? This could be something that makes them unique, that helps them serve the world in some way in the future or even now. And so I think it's really just a mindset change in my book, that we can look at these things as challenges, the way our child approaches the world, and we can see them as bugs or we can see them as features. We can see them as, this is what makes my child unique, and this is how they're going to do something really amazing in the world. And so looking at that in a new way has really opened my eyes, I know, especially with my own kids, to really see their temperamental traits as something that, you know, unique about them, that they can really do something with. And so um, however you want to interpret that, right? If your child is very intense and you find that difficult to cope with, well, maybe that intensity is going to serve them later in life, and they're going to be a fabulous CEO and very attention to detail because they're so intense about the way things have to be. Who knows, right? We don't know, but looking at it in a new light can really open some doors to, this is an amazing quality that you can really use in a positive way. And I've, even told my own kids this before, that um, one of my children is very sensitive, and as a boy, that's hard because boys are not often um, seen in a sensitive way, and they don't, sometimes that's not seen as a good quality in our culture for a boy. But if you turn that around and be like, wow, you're so empathetic, and you're going to be really good at something in this world, that really, because you're so tuned into other people's feelings, a doctor, a counselor, um, whatever it might be, that you can use those skills in a positive way. So that has really helped me. Hopefully, it can help some of you guys, looking at your child's temperament and their behavior and kind of just put a spin on it. If it's something that you find challenging, that you can usually see a positive light in it if you really try. So that is helpful. Um, if anybody has questions, hop on in. I can hang on for a few minutes here. Yeah, so temperament is pretty interesting when you get into it. It's it's a different way of looking at our child's behavior, and I think it really helps approach things from a new light. Um, so I will check the comments later if anybody has questions. Thanks, Susan, for tuning in and commenting. I appreciate that. And if anybody watches later and has anything to add, I will be checking back. If anybody has topics that they want to discuss in the group coming up here in the weeks ahead, please, just make a post, write a comment, and that is really helpful to me to know what people are interested in. And I will try to be getting on a more regular basis. We can do some more of these videos. Thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful. Thanks, Susan. That's really nice. Glad it was helpful. And I will see you guys in the group. Take care.